Okay, so Wednesday, March 4th, 2015. It's Mr. Colonel Chuck Ware, along with Hillary Richardson and Justin Whitney, conducting this oral history interview for Civil Rights Project in Starkville, Mississippi. So, Mr. Ware, can you just go ahead and tell us about where you were born and your birthplace, where you were born, what year, just some of your early background information?
I was born here in Starkville, July the 10th, 1949, in the city of Starkville itself, if you want to say that, over on the, and grew up on the western side of town. That's, if you're familiar with the neighborhood over there, Long Street runs across. The Beatty Street where I grew up is right behind that, so it's on the other side of the block from Long Street. So that's Highway 182 going west, Long Street, right as you pass Long Street, Beatty Street grew up. That's where I grew up. And as you go up Highway 182 west, on the right side there, on the north side is Henderson High School. That's now Henderson Ward, Stewart Complex, whatever. That's where we went to school. Finished high school there on that hill in 1967, and went off to college. As you guys like to say, the school up north. I went to the University of Mississippi, and I graduated from there. Out of the University of Mississippi, I was in the ROTC program. I was commissioned in the Army as a second lieutenant, and did the Army for almost 30 years. Retired and became a defense contractor in the area of the Pentagon in the Washington, D.C. area. And did that for 12 years, and then retired back home. We have always had an intent to come home. When I was a young captain, we bought this 20 acres out here, my wife and I. She's from Starkville too. She also went to Ole Miss. We bought this 20 acres out here, and when we bought this, I was in graduate school here at Mississippi State, so I claim both. I got a graduate degree out here in clinical psychology from Mississippi State, was here for 2 years in the summer, and wanted to do that because my father had passed away, and my mother had some business dealings from my father that was kind of getting away from him. So the Army gave me the option of going to school wherever I wanted to go, and I said, send me home. My mother was by herself here, and I spent 2 years in the summer here with her, going to school at State as my job, full-time job, and renovated her house and a couple of other houses and stuff while we were here, and I claim them both. But while the military Army was good to me, and I'm going to say that I am a product of Starkville, I'm a product of this environment, but I took advantage of the Army piece of it to get back here and get a graduate degree from Mississippi State, and also have an MBA from Long Island University, also at the expense of the Army.
Nice.
So, and my job as a defense contractor, again, was because of my contacts within the Army.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm a product of Starkville. I'm proud to be a product of Starkville, and that's one of the reasons we came back home to call this home.
Okay. You mentioned your parents a little bit. Can you talk about where they're from, their backgrounds?
Both of my parents, my mother and father, are both from Starkville.
Okay.
My father was what we call now a small businessman. He was a painting contractor. Most of these huge homes you see around Starkville, white wooden frame homes, and probably at one time or another my father was probably the paint contractor of record.
Okay.
I mean, he had a list of clients, and he would show up every 2 or 3 years. They didn't have to tell him, and it was an automatic thing where he had it there, he kept track of it, and he'd show up, he'd paint, they'd send a check or whatever, and he did this here in Starkville. My mother was a nurse, She worked for a guy named Dr. Eckford, Fetty Eckford.
But yeah.
If you haven't heard of that name, you haven't been around here. But Dr. Fetty was the doctor in Starkville. In fact, the last house, as you go out Main Street toward Mississippi State, the last white house on the left was Dr. Fetty Eckford's house. And the lady that asked me to take over this Oktibbeha County Scholarship Fund also worked for Dr. Eckford with my mother. So both parents are from here. My grandparents on my father's side from Starkville, they were out here at Clayton Village, just below Clayton Village. It's where my grandmother and grandfather were. My father had several brothers around here. One is, his name is Ware, Reverend Ulysses U.S. Ware. A couple of streets are named for him out there in that area. But on the other side of town, up around Maben, that's where my mother's folks came from. Gordon Belt, Ora Belt, Maben, Phoebe area. My mother was originally born in West Point, but she grew up in the Phoebe, Maben area. So my mother from the west side of the town, county, my father, grandfather, his mother, mother, father, all from east and west side of the county. So we are Oktibbeha folks.
Right in the middle. Okay. Okay. So they're, for the most part, everybody's from Starkville then. You've been around here for a long time.
Yes.
Can you talk about your childhood, what it was like growing up in Starkville at the time?
Of course, it was, I'm not, I didn't have a difficult childhood. The focus was on education. Our parents wanted us to do better than they did, have more than they had. And they felt the way to do better in life was through education. Our role models were the teachers. There were a few professional folks, business type folks here in town, like the Evans, George Evans, Ernest Jones, who had the shoe shop uptown. Wesley's son, Wesley, just recently sold that. Rob Ware had a barbershop on Main Street, the only black business that I can recall on Main Street. Dr. Connor, of course, was a black doctor here. There were a few businessmen around, and you can say, okay, well, the role models were there, but because of the stress in my household on education and going to school, for some reason, the teachers were always out front and they influenced your life. And so, not to say that I ever wanted to grow up to be a teacher, but the big thing was go to school, go to college, and you can do better than we did here. And that's kind of the way we were pushing our typical childhood, segregated childhood. Although right around the corner on one end of Long Street, it was, if you want to say white neighborhood, on the other end, black neighborhood. If you cross over Long Street, you're on what's called the boulevard, and it was a white neighborhood. There was no interaction to any degree between black and white as I was growing up. I don't really recall that. The first interaction I can recall was with people in Eckford's clinic when I got my first job, making 55 cents an hour, cleaning up there at night. That was the interaction I had. Now other folks may have had different, but typical neighborhood, typical childhood. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor. I can't say that I ever wanted really for anything that we needed. I mean, parents took care of us. My mother worked, my father worked, and I went to school.
Any siblings?
I had one brother who passed away in 1974. He had kidney failure, and he got sick and couldn't get a transplant, and he passed away. I had one sister who died of when she was 15 years old, I think 1968, maybe She had congestive heart failure. When she was born, she had heart problems and issues. Today, they would fix that right away, but back then, they waited until she was about 15 years old trying to fix it, and there were complications and she passed away. So those were my two siblings. Mother and father passed away. My father passed away in '78. My brother died in '74. Sister was in '68, I believe. My brother died on my first tour in Germany. In fact, my son was born in '74. I left my wife in the hospital while she was giving birth to my son, right after he was born. I got on a plane. When I got to Charleston, they called me and said, your brother passed, because we were trying to get back over here to see him in '74. But then my father, '78, my mother, '88. So I got some cousins, but it's just me.
Okay. Okay.
You mentioned some of your teachers were your role models. Can you tell us about some of those role models specifically?
Well, for one thing, one guy and my parents my mother did a little bit of college at Mary Holmes. My father didn't finish high school because he had to pull out and work, and he played World War II and all of that stuff. But because of the stress of education, and all teachers had college degrees, and they were, in our eyes, successful people in the community. They took a very active role, as they probably do today, in children. For example, Dr. Peoples, Dr. John Peoples. His father had a little convenience store, cafe right there beside Henderson High School. And that house right there, if you face Henderson High School from the road, the house on the right is his father's house.
Okay.
Dr. Peoples worked his way through school, eventually became president of Jackson State University.
Oh, wow.
Our parents would always say, look what John Peoples did, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or you would look at Dr. Fenton Peters, grew up right here in Needmore, as they call it. Goes to college, graduate degrees, PhD, big man in the school system here. Was a coach over there when I was there. He was one of my instructors. And you look at guys like that, and your parents will say, look at Dr. Peters, he did it. Dr. Blundey Williams, Walter Williams, same thing. I mean, I work with his wife now. She's my treasurer for this organization that we're in. But, you know, he grew up over there. Said, look at him, look at what he's doing. So you were being told, and, you know, you had people sometimes who would make you do things properly, like Miss Stewart, who's that school's named for over there. They had an impact on your life, and they did things the right way, and you felt that this is the right way to do it, this is the right way to walk, the right way to talk, and they influenced you. And they went to college, and my mother would say, you can go to college too. Mm-hmm. Buddy Nichols, that grew up on the hill there, his buddy's nephew was married to Andrea Self, David Nichols. His daddy's brother he was going to college, and he would see him sometimes leaving home, walking toward the bus stop, coming down the street and going out toward 82 and down to the bus station, carrying a bag of food to take back to college. And you know, you say, you know, I want to go to college too. One of these days I'll be carrying food to go back to college. and you just, the big push was education. Go to school. You can do so much more with an education. And so, yeah, and they would talk to you about what happened with them and how much fun they had in college, and it's a great thing, and you can do so many things here. And like I said, not that they were pushing you to be a teacher or anything like that, it was just that it was a little bit more influencing environment sometimes to where you want to go and what you want to do in the future, sometimes and from the neighborhood, and sometimes from your home. So, yeah, there were a lot of them. Dr. Peters, Mr. Purnell, even Professor Henderson. There was a news article on him the other day Well, he was in charge of the school when I started there, and his son-in-law, his daughter, you know, it was just, you know, they were coat and ties, they different, they drove nice cars. I mean, you know, not that they made a lot of money, but, you know, they were people to look up to. Ray Self and those guys, you just, hey, I want to go to college because I want to do more than what I'm doing here.
So from early on, then you had this. You're like, I'm going to college, and it had to do with your parents and also.
Yes, I mean, it was. I don't know what it's like in a household today here in Starkville and black household, black community, but I can tell you when I came along, you were expected to go to college. You were expected to finish high school. That was not a choice, and you were going to go to college. Nothing was going to interrupt that. You were going to go.
Definitely. So, outside of education, can you think of any, you know, like the fondest memories of growing up in Starkville besides focusing on education in the 50s and the 60s? Anything that stands out?
I enjoyed school. I look forward to going to school. I enjoyed growing up on Beatty Street over downtown Starkville. And the other thing that was a big influencer was church. I enjoyed going to church. And you know, if you wanted to go up and you wanted to, at one day be married and have a family or something, you either found your wife to be in school or you found her in church. Not to say that I went to church to meet girls. My wife and I went to the same church.
So is that how you met?
Her brother and I were the same year group in high school. In fact, her brother was blocking for me when I got my leg broke playing football. And not to say that he told me I could date his sister because he missed a block, but I knew her from church before school, and eventually my mother and her mother ended up being nurses working for Dr. Connell together. And in fact, we started dating right after I got busted up playing football, and I went to Ole Miss, and 2 years later she followed me up there.
Okay. So, education was real important for you for growing up, and was there any, we've talked to other individuals and they talked about, they've emphasized, you know, how the education system, it wasn't the segregated education system. They could feel it almost in terms of the quality of the education. And so was there any awareness? I mean, were people talking about that?
Well, you know, when you're growing up as a kid in school, and what you know is a segregated school system, you don't have a basis for comparing whether it's good or bad. So I am in no position to say, growing up in high school or grade school or whatever here, I was in a position to say that we didn't get a good quality education. When you stand back and look at it, yeah, it could have been better, it could have been different. But as a kid in school, high school, I tried to get whatever they gave me. And the teachers, in my mind, did a pretty good job. Now, could we have had some better ones? Yeah, we could have in some cases. But when you start looking at some of the things like books and the equipment and stuff, it wasn't the best. You know, but if you got an old book, maybe the back's torn off of it, but you're getting the materials out of it and you're reading it, and you are getting the math problems out, you're doing the math, and you're doing that. The fact that you didn't have a cover on the book, that's not going to stop you from learning, if you want to learn.
Definitely.
Now, that we had what we had. We got hand-me-down stuff from Starkville High. When I was in the 5th grade and 6th grade, did I go out and raise heck because we would get hand-me-down stuff from Starkville High? No. we took what we had, and the teachers didn't make a point of saying we're second rate, we're not here. The teachers always stressed you need to get what we're giving you and push it in your direction you need to get there. Now, yeah, do I know that the reason Henderson High School was we were Tigers, black and gold? Yeah, we were Tigers because Starkville High were Yellow Jackets and they were black and gold. And we got the hand-me-down stuff from Starkville High. So we had the same color uniform, same everything. We got books, hand-me-down books from Starkville, the Starkville School District, were passed in our direction. Athletic equipment was handed down to us from Mississippi State. So did we stand around complaining about being second rate or whatever? We made the best to do with what we had. You can just leave that on the floor, don't worry about it. But, you know, when I hear people say that we didn't get this because we didn't have this, I think if you sit down and think about it, the teachers didn't stand around and making a point of that. They said, here are the lessons, here are the problems you got to solve, here's what you got to read. And it was your responsibility to make it happen and do it. You know, I can remember when I was a kid and we were given assignments and we had books back then called encyclopedias. My parents didn't have one when we started. They didn't have it. And I had to do homework assignments that required, and you know, the library school was closed, and so you couldn't go there after 3 o'clock or whatever to the library and do that. I remember going to Ernest Jones' house, the guy who owned the shoe shop in Starkville, and using their encyclopedias to do my homework.
Nice.
Now my parents shortly thereafter started getting encyclopedias. In fact, I still have them.
Really?
I still have those encyclopedias that my parents had, because you just get a book of the year every year, and I finally stopped it, I don't know how many years ago. But on a storage house over on Beatty Street, and some of it was out there, I got a workshop out here where I've got books from, that go all the way back. I even have books from childhood, little things to read and stuff. I still have those encyclopedias. So the point here was, you know, my mother coordinated that for me to go up to Ernest Jones' house and sit in their living room and use their encyclopedias to find it. And I thought it was the best thing in the world when my parents got a set of encyclopedias. I would sit there and just start at the book number A and just start going through looking at it. And if I found something interesting, I would read it. I mean, but I didn't sit around worrying about what we had and what we didn't have. I just tried to do what the teachers put in front of us.
Just did your best.
And I think most of us did the same thing. Now that we've grown up and look back, you know, we stand around and say that. Well, we had second rate this, our teachers weren't good or whatever. You'll never hear me say that. No.
So you graduated, you said in 1967?
Yeah.
So 1967, then you went straight next year to University
Well, when I
of Mississippi.
graduated from Henderson over here, I had a scholarship to Jackson State. Academic and I think maybe a track scholarship too. And Jackson State had a program called Readiness Program where they pull students from all over the state of Mississippi that had scored X on ACT or SAT or whatever, and they brought them down there to Jackson State to be in that program. And you took college classes across that summer for 3 or 4 months. I mean, you went straight down there out of high school, and you had those classes for 3 or 4 months, and you would get college credit for those classes if you enrolled in Jackson State at all. So, but when Richard Holmes went out here to Mississippi State, I believe, in 65, 66 maybe.
65.
People were trying to get students into predominantly white schools, like State, Ole Miss, Southern, and other places, that could they felt could survive. So you were somewhat encouraged to do that. So rather than stay at Jackson State, I'd already been accepted at Ole Miss, no scholarship or nothing like that. I went to Ole Miss. So it was in the fall, I went up there, not straight out of high school. I spent the summer at Jackson and pulled the plug and went to Ole Miss in '67.
Okay.
You just said that people encouraged you to go to predominantly white schools if they thought you could survive. Is that right? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
They thought you could make the grade if you could pass the courses.
Were these your teachers, your parents?
Counselors, people in the local community, they didn't push you to go do anything, but they encourage you. Why don't you go to state? Why don't you go to Ole Miss?
Why do you think they did that?
Because we needed to, if you want to say, integrate more of these schools. So when I got to Ole Miss, the group that came in with me, it made about 30 black students in the class, on the whole university. So the year before we got there, it was maybe 8, 10, something like that, black students at Ole Miss. This was in '67. We had some of my classmates from high school went out here, Helen Watt, Bertha Conley, I think Betsy Minor, some of the others. This was in '67, went out here. Now you gotta remember, my class, my high school class, was the class that desegregated Starkville High. And it happened in 1966. They took 8 to 10 guys out of our class at Henderson High School. And out of our class, our junior year, I was not one of them. Helen Watt was not. She finished number 1 in the class, I finished number 2. So they kept the 1 and 2 at Henderson High. But and for my wife's brother, he was one of them, and sent them to Starkville High. Now several of those, not several, some of those guys came back to Henderson High. Maybe 3, 4 of them came back. Henry Ashford was another one that went over there, R.D. Harris, I believe Willie Harvey Johnson, who was the fireman here, the fire chief for a while. I believe he was one of them that went over, but he came back too, to Henderson High. But my brother-in-law, he stayed there. He graduated from Henderson High. So that was the first class. Now after that, of course, we left. They started sending kids in, like her youngest brother was one of the first kids to go into Overstreet, black kids or whatever. But the very first class that do any type of integration here of schools in this county was my class of '67, but they went over in '66 in the junior year. And so, but onesies and twosies of us went to Mississippi State, went to Ole Miss, and other places. Because the problem was, you had an adjustment problem when you went to these schools. I mean, you ate by yourself. You were the only black kid in the class. When you walked across campus, you were walking by yourself. So you had an adjustment. And then sometimes, my first year there, I had a white roommate. A guy named, what's his name? Whitman, from Henderson, Kentucky, was my roommate up there. And I'm sure the same, but a lot of kids that went out here lived at home and not on campus. Well, at Ole Miss, I lived on campus. Now, my second year there, my roommate was from Jackson, Mississippi, was a black guy. And we were roommates until we left there, until he left. He left before I did. And we both went in the Army together. So it was an adjustment problem. You just didn't encourage any kid at Henderson High School, you need to go to Ole Miss or you need to go to Mississippi State. You didn't do that. And sometimes the counselors would say, you sure that's what you want to do? And probably there were not a lot of people jumping out of the door to go to Mississippi State or to Ole Miss. I mean, they prefer to go to Jackson, Alcorn, Mississippi Valley, and that's where most of my classmates went to school. So a little bit different.
Definitely.
And see, one of the other things too is during Freedom Summer, and this is what I told Dr. Middleton out here. You didn't see a lot of kids in high school out doing a lot of active things during, well, there wasn't a lot of demonstrations, but you did see a lot of kids really being hard over activists as high schoolers. Now, a little bit more as you got towards your senior year, you know, you're a little bit more outspoken or whatever. But if you were a kid in high school or junior high school, you went to school. Mm-hmm. The kids, the guys that participated in Freedom Summer or in the school, like Bobby Dean, he finished school in '60. Ed Lee Mackey was another guy. He wasn't in school. Some of the other guys that already gone through high school or that dropped out of high school. Mm-hmm. But the focus was, you go to school and you graduate. I don't need you to get into anything that'll keep you from graduating. Now, did we venture out and do some things? Yeah, we did. But parents made it clear, you go to school. That's your primary responsibility, is to go to school and get a degree and then go to college. So when Dr. Middleton was asking me about guys that had participated in the Freedom School, I reached out to guys that had graduated and were seniors during that period. Like Richard Holmes, the guy that was the first black student out here. Richard didn't participate in that. Mm-hmm. Lucius Outlaw was one of his classmates, who's now a professor at Vanderbilt, Dr. Outlaw. He and I talked for a long time trying to nail down who was there and who did what. And he didn't do it. Neither did Howard Weatherspoon, who was an instructor here. He finished school, I think, in '60. He didn't. He was in college, I guess. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying that a lot of the hands-on activism, if you want to say that, a little bit by kids in high school, not an awful lot. Okay. I mean, in terms of voter registration drives and stuff, kids in high school, they were in school. I mean, mm-hmm. you were doing this stuff during the day or whatever, and sometimes on the weekend, but kids went to school.
So you bring up an interesting point. So early on in Freedom Summers, it's mostly more active people have been graduated for a while. What about your experience or familiarity with the protests in 1970 in Starkville? Do you see something of a little bit different thing going on?
The only thing was, specific date in Starkville in 1970, I don't recall, but the first demonstrations and marches and that type stuff that I recall here in town started right after Dr. King was killed in '68.
So earlier on than
1970. And I remember one time, we were demanding, we had a list of demands up at Ole Miss to the chancellor and other folks about what they need to do to get this university going in the right direction, and I'm sure they had the same thing out here at State. But what really got people out on the street marching and stuff was when Dr. King was killed. And I remember coming home from Ole Miss and came home on the bus. And the bus used to be, the bus stop was right there by 182 and Washington Street. Near a place called Mug and Cone or something right there, and that Texaco service station was right behind there. And I remember getting off the bus and took my little luggage and stuff, and I could see the march coming up the street. It was coming from west on 82, coming down the highway toward Washington Street, maybe heading toward downtown or whatever. But the marches I saw primarily were down 82, and maybe some up on Washington Street, and maybe some across Jefferson Street. But I didn't see a lot of stuff up on Main Street. But I saw it from the bus, and I got my luggage out and put it in a taxi. And the taxi driver was my neighbor. And the march came by, and I saw some of the people that I knew in the march, and I was, what's going on there? You know, said we're protesting or whatever it was. So I asked Mr. Taylor, who's still alive, by the way, and I said, can you take my stuff home? He said, yeah, I'll take it home. I said, well, I'm gonna get this march. So I got in the march. As soon as I got in the march, got put handcuffs on. And I said, wait, what did I do? He said, no, you don't need to be a part of this. And they put us all in jail at the field house down there on Long Street.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get home. My luggage got home.
Uh-huh.
But they took us down there, and it's the King Center or whatever it is down there on Long. It used to be a swimming pool down there. Now it's a splash park or something there. But the Henderson High School athletic complex was on the hill there with a Ward Stewart, whatever it is. It was behind that, the football field. We played baseball back there, played basketball in the gym and all that other stuff. But you didn't ever have enough room there to play football or baseball. The city of Starkville built a new facility on Long Street. And they put a field house down there. Now, granted, Starkville High had their new field and everything with pretty lights and big stadium across 12. Theirs used to be right there on Greensboro Street. So they built one for the black folks down there. Well, what the police in the city did during that demonstration was they took over the field house and they locked us all up in the field house. And that's where my first night in 1968 coming home from Ole Miss, because they had closed the school down there because of protests. My first night back at home was in the field house. But as it turns out, they didn't lock the door. So some guy pushed on the door was open, and the police went home or whatever. Everybody pushed the field all out and walked home.
So they just left you guys in there? They just left?
Yeah, we just went home. But the marches and stuff, of course, fell in line with, from what I could see, with Dr. King's death, demands, voting rights, you know, better treatment, better schools and everything else. And most of the marches were primarily school kids. Now, in terms of Freedom Summer in '64, it wasn't. But for the marches, if you want to talk 70, I don't remember very much about 70 because I'd have to catch it whenever I'd come home and go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
But most of them were from '68 onward, and it was school kids. Kids would get up and leave school and encourage their classmates to get out of Henderson High School. And the teachers didn't stand out there with guns and try to stop it or anything, and kids would march right down the street and get on 82 and go up and down 82, cross Jefferson Street, maybe up around Main Street. But I do remember one where they called the folks from Starkville, the police, and the state troopers come in to disperse the crowd. And a close friend of mine ended up with a butt of a rifle in her face. And that was breaking up a march up on 82 and Long Street that was basically over. But in terms of door-to-door voter registration, negotiating with the city, you had guys like Dr. Carter, George Evans, and those folks that were doing that. You had people that come in to assist. I remember one guy's name was Cotton Reader. 2 or 3 of those guys came in. I don't know where he's from, but I remember he came in here and helped organize the protests, the marches, the demonstrations. But the legwork for anything that was done here in Starkville, the mover and the shaker, was Dr. Carter. He was the guy. Now you had other guys like Wolf Taylor, Clarence Taylor was active, since passed on. Magruder Taylor, his brother, Another guy that was active was Bert Robinson. Used to have a funeral on Robinson Funeral. It's now Century Harrison 21. Not Century 21, but Century Harrison Funeral Home. The guy that runs it now is my classmate. He was a foster son to Bert Robinson. But Bert and then Bert's father, you had people that were war veterans that were pretty active in the movement, working with the NAACP for change. But whatever progress was made here was, in my mind, done locally by people that were local here in Starkville. Mm-hmm. Again, like I said, I left here in '67 going to school, and I was just back and forth. But I had an idea about what was going on here.
So, would you say, just from what your knowledge of the protest, did it change anything in Starkville? We've heard a little bit about how beforehand, most of the employees, most of the businesses, they didn't employ African Americans in terms of throughout the broader city area. Can anything come to your mind about immediate changes?
I don't recall African American black folks worked across the city. For example, the shoe store right there on the corner, Cleveland Shoe Store. That's where Restaurant Tyler is now. That was a shoe store.
Okay.
Barbara Ann Evans, who's now Barbara Ann Logan, worked there ever since I can remember.
Okay.
Now, her sister Grace also worked there. They had two parts to the store. Up front, they had a place where white folks would try on their shoes, and you'd walk right straight through there to the back, you would try on your shoes. Well, Barbara Ann would fit you for shoes. Back here as a black person, you didn't sit up front with the white people, you would go to the back. Well, her Grace would fit white folks up here, Barbara Ann would do it. So you were all in the same big room, it's just that it was a place over here for you to try your shoes on, and a place over there for them to try their shoes on. You would go to Katz's, a dress shop. Black folks worked there too, and it was frequent by both. Now, where you did have segregation was in the eating facilities. That cafe up on Main Street. Is it People's Cafe?
Starkville Cafe?
Whatever it is, Stark Cafe or People, whatever it is. You had to go in the back door. I think now they got a beer garden or something out there. You come in that way, but that's where black folks went in to eat, back in that back room there.
Okay.
You go all over the South and you see those things like that, little back rooms or whatever. When you go in that Stark Cafe and you go in the front room, you go all the way to the back, go off to the left, and you kind of go up the steps there. That's where black folks were.
Okay.
If you want to eat there or come in there, you came in that way. Now, black folks were in there doing the cooking, just like at the Express Clinic. All the nurses were black. You had colored and white waiting rooms. On the door, colored. You had colored and white drinking fountains. Well, as a result of that, before I finished college, at Express Clinic, black folks could come in the front door now instead of having to go around the back, go in the back door. And you could sit in the white waiting room. And that came about, a lot of it, but when, you had people coming in here, now you got black professors out of college or whatever, they go sit in the white waiting room. You still had black folks go sit in the black waiting room, even after it was integrated. It's just like in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. You got twice as many bathrooms in the Pentagon as you need. You had black and white bathroom. You had two water fountains right there together in the Pentagon in Virginia. And they're still there today.
Really?
They're not black and white.
Right,
But there are two water fountains sitting right there together.
and
there are two bathrooms right there together for men. They're still there. You can take that bathroom or you can go in that bathroom. But it was white and black. It was all over the South. It wasn't just here in Mississippi. So, yeah, but I'm not going to say black people couldn't work at these places. Black folks worked, It's just that there were some places, like, you didn't sit down and eat with white people. You didn't do it. You would eat in the back, or you go to a black cafe, or whatever it was. Movies, theaters. You had, in this town, you guys probably already heard all this, right?
No,
I haven't heard any about movies. No.
You had the State Theater, that was the one right there on Main Street by that cafe, white on. Black folks didn't go in that period. Now, black folks may have been out in the Braden projector or whatever it was, but you didn't go in that theater. It was for white only. Primarily college students used that theater. You continue down Main Street till you get to Restaurant Tyler on the left. Across the street from that, on Washington Street, was the Rex Theater. You had black and white in there, but the white folks black folks went a balcony upstairs. White folks would go in down below and go in below. So you had black folks sitting up in the balcony and white folks down below. Well, when that went away, you could go down below. But you would buy your ticket outside and go into the same concession stand as white folks, but then you'd have to come out of the concession stand and go upstairs and sit in the balcony at the Rex. Now, black folks had a theater under the hill called a Lux. Only black people went there. That was as you go down Lafayette Street toward 82, and just as you get to Jefferson Street on the left, just before you get to the electric department now, the electric department was a restaurant called, I can't remember, Mug and Cone or something like that. That spot was right there. But across the street there's where the black movie was, black African-American movie, if you want to call it that. But you can get in for 10 cents or whatever, a hot dog wrapper, sit there and watch Rod Rogers and Lone Ranger and Lassie Roof all day for 10 cents.
Did every theater play the same movies, or did one theater play different?
They were different movies.
Different movies?
But then again, everybody, in some cases, everybody watched the Westerns. You know, Gene Autry, Rod Rogers, Lone Ranger, Hopalong Cassidy, Cisco Kid. Everybody watched all those movies. They would play those all on Saturdays, and they were probably all at theaters. But what happened as a result of that, the signs came down from the water fountains, you know, call it white, whatever. Signs came down, the water fountain stayed there. And although there were no signs, in some cases on, say, the Stark Cafe saying white only to come in the front door, you were allowed to go in there. And it took some time before folks were comfortable, if you want to say, going in there instead of going in the back door. And you still had a lot of black folks going in the back door. Just like when the signs came down on Exeter Clinic for colored and white waiting room, instead of black folks going and sit in the big waiting room with white folks, a lot of them still go sit in the other waiting room. And I can remember folks telling them, you don't have to come in here. You can go sit over there. That's all right, I'll go sit. Okay.
So I want to talk, ask you a little bit about your experience in the military.
Yep.
And so you graduated in 1971 from University of Mississippi.
72. I stayed around for an extra year.
72.
When I finished school, actually finished school in 71. But I did. Back then, you had to apply for a degree.
Right.
If you didn't apply for a degree, you didn't graduate. So you had to apply for a degree, money, and then pay whatever that graduation fee, whatever it was. So you can go to school after 10 years if you want. Just don't apply for a degree.
Right.
Well, my wife and I got married in 71. I was commissioned, no, I had a commission, a second lieutenant's commission in the Chemical Corps. And it was a 3-month active duty commission. Only had to be on active duty for 3 months. And at the end of that 3 months, I would go into the Army Reserves for 6 years. So my degree was chemistry, biology, whatever. I applied for a job as in some chemical company up in Memphis or whatever. And we got married. So I went back and got another degree, got a minor in math. I ended up with a bunch of degrees. I had a minor in math, minor in chemistry, biology was a major, minor in math. So when I got ready to leave the school the next year, the Army, or my PMS decided, you're not gonna go in for 3 months, you're gonna have to go for 2 years. And oh, by the way, because she was such a good student here, because I was the commander or whatever, the deputy commander for the ROTC program, we'll give you a regular Army commission. That means 3 years, you got a job for life or whatever. And, you know, I just got married. We didn't have kids, but we just got married. And I said, if I got to go for 2, what the heck, go for 3. And so I ended up taking the regular Army commission. And then when I took the regular Army commission, the guy said, well, I'll tell you what, you're going to be an infantry officer. Not a chemical corps officer, you're going to be an infantry officer. You guys know what an infantry officer is?
In the field, right?
You know, you're a ground founder, warfighter.
Mm-hmm.
Chemical corps guys, a little staff job, but infantry, you are the fighter. And so, by the way, you're going to go to airborne school and ranger school on the way to Germany. So, airborne school, ranger school, infantry officer basic, off to Germany as an infantry officer.
Okay, so you had these experiences early on with protests and whatnot. Obviously, you're going to overseas, so it's going to be a little bit of a different experience. But does anything stand out in terms of, you know, when you first learning about the situation in Germany, like in terms of relations?
Totally different environment in Germany, dealing with Germans than with white folks in the United States.
Okay.
You were basically accepted.
Okay.
Color of your skin didn't make a difference. I guess because over time or whatever, you know, black folks being over there. But I was the only black officer in my battalion. I was a battalion of about 800 men. I was the only black officer in the battalion. The battalion had 40-some officers in it, one black. So here again, you have a different experience. Because I had gone to Ole Miss and I had been in an environment where onesies and twosies in terms of blacks, my adjusting to the military was a little bit easier than folks who had not been in an Ole Miss or Mississippi State environment. You didn't feel, you weren't concerned with, in my mind, issues so much of black and white. Again, you were just trying to get the job done. And it wasn't as if you had to go to the back of the bus or you had to eat in a separate dining room or you had to belong to a different officers club or you had to live in a different housing area, a segregated housing area. That didn't happen. It was, you're in the Army, you're there. But again, the numbers were not there. I mean, it wasn't until 2 years later that we had another black officer to show up in the battalion. At the time we got there, it was 2 black officers in the brigade. Now, brigade may be as many as 4,000 people, which only had 2 black officers. So it was a growing, learning experience in the Army. And the Army is result-oriented. If you could produce the results, you were okay. It wasn't so much, he can't do it because he's black. Now, later on, there were probably some issues there. Probably there were quotas in terms of how many blacks we're going to promote to this level, but at the lower level, not so much. But even when I was a major in the Army, not a major, but a captain, there was a board in the Pentagon. There was a board to attend the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. And there were very few, if any, African-American officers selected for that course. Shy Meyer, who was the Chief of Staff of the Army, threw out the board results and started it all over again. And a large number of African Americans were in that class. In fact, the class I was in out there in 1983 has the largest number of African Americans on record. And even to this day, we meet every year, a number of us.
Do you?
We were in Biloxi this past November. I convinced them, and we've got guys coming out of Washington, D.C. area, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, California, Texas. We meet somewhere. We go to Vegas, we've been on cruises to Bahamas, or whatever. But a number of us will get together every year. This past year, I convinced them to come to Biloxi because none of them had ever been to Mississippi. And we spent 4 days down at the Boulder Barge and went over to New Orleans and whatever. But that office is in that class. And because of the elimination of any indication or implication that there was a quota system in the Army for black officers, we were able to get together with a class that large, and we still are now. Some folks will say that still is somewhat in the Army, because during the Gulf War, we had 700,000 people over there. I think we had, I was a battalion commander in the first Gulf War, of a mechanized infantry battalion task force, you know, tanks and Bradleys. I'm thinking 20 battalion commanders maybe. There were at least 8 of us in the infantry that were over there, black infantry officers, of the number of battalions that were there. But you still have issues, and you may see something out there that indicates something is not right, even in the Army and other places. One of the problems we have in the Army right now is getting blacks, African Americans, to go combat arms, to go into the war fighting branches. Daughter from Georgia. I'll tell you about her in a minute, but what time do you guys supposed to leave here?
Maybe we have about 15 more minutes.
It's up to you. It's how long.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, but the part of the problem we caused ourselves. In the early days of the Army, African Americans, for the most part officers, including my dad in World War II, officers came primarily from historically black colleges, okay? And they were support branch type officers. Quartermaster, supply, ordnance, maintenance type stuff. Support branches. In fact, those schools only commission support branch officers. So what do you have 20 years from later when you want to put them back down as instructors and PMSs? The guy that grew up there wants to go back there, and he's back there. So now you have these young officers, young lieutenants or young cadets now at the historically black college who looks up for a role model, and he's a quartermaster, support branch officer. And these kids are not going into combat arms, into the infantry, to the armor, to the artillery. They're going into support branches. Well, guess what? You support branch guys, very few of you, if any, ain't going to be generals. You're not going to be generals of the Army, chief of staff of the Army. They're going to come from the combat arms. Mm-hmm. And so, as a result, you're seeing very few, if any, going into or getting up to that level of general officer. I mean, you got, right now you got 2 4-stars that I know of, 3. You got 3 black 4-stars in the Army now. Lloyd Austin, who was commander of CENTCOM, he's doing the ISIS stuff and the fights over there. And you got Brooks, that's in Pacific Command. And you got Dennis Vi right here in Huntsville. Lloyd went to West Point, and Brooks went to West Point. Dennis Vi went to Virginia State. So 2 from West Point, one from Virginia State. And Brooks is infantry, Lloyd is infantry. Dennis Vi was a great hotshot officer. He's a Signal Corps guy. It will be a month of Sundays before you see another Signal Corps officer get 4 stars. Dennis was good, very good. I mean, and I know this for a fact. Dennis was one of my students at the War College. I taught him campaign planning. Dennis was good. You couldn't deny Dennis. I don't care where he went to school. And Dennis is up there right now in Huntsville as the Army Materiel Commander, 4-star general, black gentleman, that went to Virginia State University. Onesies and twosies. Is it because of a quota system? Not an overt one, I don't say that. But I'm just saying that you got to mentor these young officers coming into the Army, cadets, and push them in the right direction. If you plan to stay in the Army and you want to be a general officer, this is what you probably need to do. And that's where guys like me come in, into that mentoring. So, but are we in the Army, are we perfect? No. In a lot of cases, a lot of ways, we're a lot better off than the society at large in terms of moving forward with integration.
So you're talking about, you know, comparing the past in terms of the military to the present. What about your thoughts in terms of Starkville and civil rights?
Starkville's come a long way. In fact, we lived a lot of places. Just before coming here, we lived in Alexandria, Virginia. You have issues in Virginia, just like you have issues down here. But down here, the issues are going to be publicized more so than up there. I have no regrets about moving back here. We could have moved someplace else or gone. People ask me all the time, why do you go back to Mississippi? Why do you go back to Starkville? It's my home. And take your pick, across the southeast, up the east coast, Texas, same issues are there. But I know the people here, and we have made a lot of progress here in this town. Mississippi State has helped a lot. The association with the university, a college town, an enlightened, educated community. Starkville was voted as one of the best cities in which, small cities in which to live. I think somewhere not too long ago they voted Starkville as one of the most intelligent cities. That includes big cities like New York, Chicago, and all the rest of them. So, are we there yet? No. Do we have a lot of problems? Yes, we do. Can we get there? I hope so. You know, a lot of our wounds here in Mississippi are self-inflicted. When you sit down and look at some of the stuff that's coming out of Jackson, that's coming from our administrators down there, our elected officials, it's a self-inflicted wounds. When you look at 40%, more than 40% of the revenue in the state of Mississippi is from federal funds, and you fight the federal government, that's a foot shot. That's taking your foot up and blowing your toes off. I mean, and you don't have to go all the way to Jackson, but you sit there and you say, well, we got problems here, we got problems here. Until we realize, look at what we're putting in office in Jackson. That's our problem. Poorest state in the nation. Part of our problem is who we put in office. Now you can say what you want about Haley Barber. Now Haley Barber went through Ole Miss just before I got there, or was a senior when I got there, as a freshman or whatever. But Haley Barber knows how to play the system. But he's not a well-liked man in the state of Mississippi right now. When you look at look at politics, you had McDaniels or whatever his name running against Cochran. doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who you should put up there. Granted, Cochran is no saint, but you're dumber than dirt to put McDaniels up there to think he's going to do something for the state of Mississippi. Self-inflicted. It was almost there. Now you're going to tell me that, granted, like I said, Cochran is no saint, but if you want to do something for the state of Mississippi, this guy is better positioned to do that, just like Haley Barber was, than this other guy. And you say, we got to figure this out. But we can be our own worst enemies at times here in the state. Starkville has made a lot of progress, come a long way, but we still got a long way to go.
You mentioned you want to talk about your daughter, you said real quick?
Oh yeah. We put a lot of stress on education with our kids. My son graduated out here at Mississippi State in 97 maybe, 96, 97. He had a good time out there as a student. He had a good time. And my daughter went to summer school out here, but she graduated James Madison because we were in Pennsylvania, and James Madison was 2.5 hours from Carlisle, and she was a homegirl. She got a master's degree from Mercer, MBA from Mercer. She is now she is the Deputy Director for Human Resources for Juvenile Justice for the state of Georgia. Very proud of her. But what we tried to do with our kids, the same thing our parents did with us, stress the importance of education and going to school. And you know, we're proud of them both. We think that we did something right with them in that she's in a position to help some people and help them do things. But just as our parents in the 60s, 50s stressed education moving forward, Kate and I try to do the same thing for our kids, and hopefully they'll do the same thing with their kids.
Definitely.
But you know, we both went to college, graduated, kids are the same, so we're not complaining.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add that you think that we left out in terms of talking about Starkville?
Kate and I both just want to give back to the community as best we can. She's a volunteer now with third graders because we got a real problem with third graders in the state of Mississippi in education. Particularly when you say the number of African American males in third grade, only 27% of them are performing at third grade level. We got a real problem. What we're trying to do now with me and the scholarship thing is try to, even if it's just $500 or $1,000 or whatever, give kids something to get them started and help them out the first year of college. Because we feel that once you get them started, they'll figure out a way to make it happen. But help them out, help them get started. So, granted, we're both retired here at home, but Starkville was good to us. And we just hope that we can do something here to give back to the community. And that's one of the reasons we said we're going to go home and start. Now, granted, we thought about it years ago to come back here. We bought this 20 acres here when I was a student out here at State. One guy tried to get me to develop it into a subdivision, and we just kind of didn't do anything to it. And so, but you know, this is home, so we're back at home.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions you'd like to ask?
I wanted to ask, but I think you already answered it, about your scholarship program, about how it worked in the community.
Here's what we did. The schools desegregated in 1970. Now granted, my class was the first class that integrated in Starkville High School in 1966. 1970 was the last year Henderson High School existed as a high school. What Ray Self, Andrea Self's grandfather, did was, hey, let's start a scholarship program. And they used to call it Sam Skinner years ago because it was just football players and athletes. But let's start a scholarship program and try to give kids something to go to school. Well, what we did was, we were trying to find a way to raise the money, so what we did was we said, let's have a reunion, a school reunion, for everybody that went to that segregated school over there every other year. And we'll charge a registration fee, and part of that will be scholarship donation. And you can also donate separately to the scholarship. We'll sell ads in the souvenir booklet. That's how we raise money. People will donate money to the scholarship program. They will, if they just sign up as part of the registration to come to the reunion, part of that registration goes toward the scholarship. And that scholarship is offered to any kid in Oktibbeha County. And last year we gave out $8,000 worth. We could have done more. And we're going to do better this year. Not 2 years ago we gave out $8,000 worth. But we're going to try to do better this coming year, because we got some better ways, I think, to raise money. But what happens is we take scholarship applications and give them to the counselors in all the schools. Starkville, High, East and West Oktibbeha, to the counselors, and kids take it, apply for scholarships, and we review the application. It's all based on merit, you know, ACT, SAT scores and academic grades and that type of stuff, grade point averages. And we award scholarships. This past year we did it at the awards banquet, and not banquet, but at the awards day at Starkville High and at East and West Oktibbeha. And we're going to do it again in May in the same form. This is not just for black kids. In fact, the kid that got one of the largest scholarships last year and had the best, was best on the order of merit, was a white kid. They attend the banquet, award banquet. We give them a certificate, give them a letter, award scholarship, and they send us their transcript once they enroll in school, and we send them money. And been doing it since 1998, 1999, because yeah, I came back here to speak at the first banquet in '99. Been doing it since 1999, and we're going to keep it going. So what you have is guys who graduated in 1970, some graduated from Starkville High in 75, 76. In fact, one of my vice presidents is a 72, 73 graduate of Starkville High. Former Command Sergeant Major in the Army. This guy was in charge of ROTC at Starkville High School, Sergeant Major in the Army. We have those people that graduated, and the oldest graduate to show up last year was Miss Mamie Pruitt. I think she graduated in 1941. And so we had people from class of 1941 all the way up to Starkville High class of 75. 200-300 people in there at that reunion, at banquet where we award scholarships. But we are a 501c3 organization. So consider your taxes or whatever when you give us money or whatever, and we reach out to local businesses for scholarship contributions, sell them ads to go in our souvenir booklet. We have a website now where they can put if they're a donor, we'll hang their name on the website, so anybody that goes on the website and wants to find out about the reunion, they can see their names over there and know that these guys put money in the scholarship. And classes are doing that. Class of 56 last year gave $2,000 for scholarship. Wow. Class of 65, 50 year, that's Dr. Henshaw's class. You know her?
Shirley Intro.
We have an interview coming up with her, I think, next week.
Yeah.
So.
And I think she was supposed to be the first black out of state. And her parents wouldn't let her go. She may tell you that. But that's when they got Richard to go. But see, Richard had already graduated a couple of years early or whatever, but they were trying to get Shirley to go.
Yeah.
But at any rate, her class is in the 50th. This is their 50-year reunion. And they are raising money to give a scholarship in their class name. 70s doing it, class of 70s doing it, class of 69 is doing it. I'm trying to get my class of 67 to do it. 56 is going to do it again. And I believe 64 is going to do it. So we got these class POCs, or points of contact, that are getting the classes together to cough up a little money. And hopefully we can do a little bit better with scholarships this year.
Sounds like an excellent program.
Well, it's great to give a kid something to get them started. But it is also good to see folks, for folks like me who used to come back here, I haven't seen people. See, I mean, for all practical purposes, I left here in '67 and didn't get back till 2012. So I would come back to these reunions and Orth banquet, and I'd see people I hadn't seen. So it's people getting together and hadn't seen folks, and most of us are retirement age from my year group. Now 70's getting close, but not as many of us around as it was before. You start paying attention to that stuff when you get old. See these guys died over here and the guy died over there. I remember all these folks dying when I was younger. But
All right. I think we're going to wrap things up then.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and